Chucking Darts is back. The playoffs are underway, and it's time to tell some truths with S. That's right. It is NBA playoff voir dire. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed,
Nice.
rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. And you can call me Chuck. This is episode number 201 after a somewhat unplanned hiatus. Episode number 200 was last month in April. That was my buddy, Matt Powers, who is at Draft Pow, editor in chief of Swish Theory. He came on right before the national title game between Purdue and Connecticut, talking about why Zach Edey was the number one player on his board. And we went through a lot of theory as to how Zach Edey is a historical outlier, how his particular brand of outlierness might return number one value in a very unsettled class. We also touched on Donovan Clingan,
Right.
our scouting report on him, and San Francisco's Jonathan Mogbo, who's a Powers favorite. I'm a fan of his as well, and he is, I believe, just starting his draft workouts and climbing up board. So hopefully GMs and fans alike have checked that show out. But
Best friend of
today,
Scotty Barnes, Jonathan Mogbo, by the way.
there you go.
Putting it
Maybe
out
he will
there.
be a Raptor.
Planting the seeds. I don't know. Where is he expected to fall or
I
be at?
think he's a combine and workout swing piece, just like
Cool.
many people are. I mean, I think teams generally are looking for players to fall in love with, you
Right.
know? It's
Yeah.
really like first night of the Bachelor energy right now in the draft process. So like Mogbo has enough going for him in his athleticism and his size and his feel that I'm sure he will impress in interviews and all of that stuff. And his measurables are going to be very, very good because he was second in the country in dunks to Zach Edey.
Right.
So with all of that, I wouldn't be surprised to see, by this time in, maybe 2 weeks from now, that he's in first round discussions and blah 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 blah. I have
Okay.
him as a first round prospect.
Okay.
But this draft is relatively hard to
I'm just trying to
parse.
see, is he, because the Raptors could potentially have three picks. Is he a 19 or is a 31? Is he
I have him closer to 19. My bet is that he would be available probably at 31. Probably.
okay? Okay.
If his stock really rises, you might have to nab him at 19. But I think you can do that and you'd feel just fine.
Okay. All right.
That's
We'll see.
I like him a lot. And anyway, by the way, my guest today is Esfandiar Baraheni, who is on a few episodes ago numerically, though it seems like it's been a minute when we talked about your all most improved teams,
Right. Yep.
your all space most improved teams, not
Right. Right.
almost improved.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're basically an article you wrote, I believe, for Forbes, was it at the
Yep.
time? That
Yeah. Yeah.
was you went three teams deep, all NBA style, about the most improved player in the NBA this year. This is before the award was, given to Tyrese Maxey. We talked about theories of improvement, what improvements matter the most, the players that we wanted to give the most love to on that front. Something that I hope that we can do every year because it is right up my alley and I know it's right up yours.
Big time.
Um,
Yeah.
but now we are at the point of the season where not only does, all business get settled, but improvements get sort of set in stone, so to speak. Lessons get learned. Truths are told, whether some teams want to hear them or not. In fact, there's a lot of candor coming from Miami and Pat Riley, from New Orleans with David Griffin, about just what they think of their own teams in sort of the cold, sobering light of the early offseason. And so I wanted to have you on to talk about the playoffs and what you think we are learning and what you think we have learned, both positive and negative.
Ooh.
Um, so first of all, S, how are you?
I'm good. I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate
Mm-hmm.
you. Yeah, I'm excited to talk improvement. You know, that's right up my alley. It's definitely something that I watch closely. And you know what? It's funny because the playoffs do sort of determine, maybe not for you and me, but just for the general public, like it's sort of the determining factor of if there was truly improvement, if there wasn't improvement, maybe there's a flash or whatever. But at the end of the day, the playoffs are a determining factor, and I think that's what makes this interesting, this conversation.
Yeah, I think even if people like you and me like to believe that we're considering the whole sample size and the
Yeah.
playoffs are a factor but not the factor. It's hard not to lean
Sure.
into what
Yeah.
the playoffs have to say. I mean,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it is sort of what the whole season builds to.
Right.
But I would say that the early narrative about these playoffs probably begins in Minnesota, since they have made the loudest statement. And with Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Carl Anthony Towns playing so well, that whole team. Is there anything from that series? First of all, do you believe that that series is mostly over? Do you believe that Minnesota
Mhm.
will finish that series off? And if so, what do you think is permanent as a takeaway from Minnesota and Denver?
I don't think it's over yet.
Okay.
I kind of don't want to, count the chickens before they have, whatever the saying is, right? Is that the saying? Yeah, did I get it right?
Yeah,
Count the.
yeah. Count your chick. I think so. You
Okay.
don't want to chuck your darts before they're sharp. I don't know.
There
I
we
don't know.
go.
I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
know.
sure.
Yeah.
I'll take it. I'll take it. Yeah, I think just 2-0 winning the first two games on the road. That's going to be a tall order for Denver to try and come back. There's no question about that. But at the same time, I think what we've seen in the first two games makes it seem like Minnesota has a foolproof plan when it comes to executing just the elimination of the Denver Nuggets, the complete evisceration of the Denver Nuggets. The game 2 was probably one of the more shocking playoff games I've watched, just
Hmm.
because a team like the Nuggets that, every single time you've been able to watch them, whether it's the regular season, whether it's the playoffs, asterisk, asterisk, fully healthy, when they're fully healthy, they have looked completely unstoppable on the offensive end. A hive-like offense, things are flowing. Everything is flowing in one motion. If one advantage isn't created, they're flowing into the next action to create another advantage. It's Jokic Murray two-man game that flows into the Aaron Gordon Jokic two-man game, and there's obviously the complementary cogs of Michael Porter Jr. and Contavious Caldwell Pope, and they hum along. And even if they're having bad shooting nights, they still somehow hum along to like 110, 115 points a night. That being said, it has completely stopped against the Minnesota Timberwolves. And there's a couple of reasons for that: size, length, just incredible perimeter defense. I think, for what it's worth, Jamal Murray doesn't look 100% either, but
Hmm.
Minnesota has made it much more difficult for him to even try to look good in this series. I think there's multiple combinations of why Minnesota is winning the series. Like, we could go in depth on every single reason, but if we're trying to like glean something from this and figure out if there's really any sort of improvement, I think the one thing, maybe the one, how do you put this? The one, I guess, deciding factor for this Timberwolves roster construction is to not have any real holes on the defensive end.
Hmm.
That makes you a wholly more versatile, wholly more unique team in the playoffs, because there's not one guy out there that you can hunt. There's not one guy that you can conventionally people would think Carl Anthony Towns is that guy, but he's held up very well. And it's having that ability to put out any 5-man unit that will have no holes defensively. And so you never have that drop off. You never have that, hey, let's exploit this for 5, 6 possessions in a row. You just have a seamless defensive team that, much like the Nuggets offensively, is this hive like mind. The Timberwolves are like a hive like mind on the defensive end. And so I think they've just met their match from that perspective. And yeah, if we're looking at individual improvement, that's a different story. But just roster team construction, I think it's an interesting theory to have guys who just do not skip a beat on the defensive end.
Yeah, I think first of all, Tim Connolly's gotten a lot of flowers this week. We can
Yeah.
certainly give him those here in the space as well. But I think it is important to remember how specifically Minnesota was constructed to beat Denver. Like, shrewdly so.
Yeah.
They happen to be meeting in the second round. They could have just as easily met in the conference finals, with the way that the seeds went out. But Minnesota has so much size, between McDaniels, Kyle Anderson, Nas, Townsend, Gobert, at any given time on the floor, because they know that not only does Denver play through Jokic, who is, the biggest player on the floor for Denver at any given time, but Gordon and Porter provide such an advantage against basically every other team in the league
Yeah.
besides Minnesota because of how much size they have, how much ground they cover, you know, the release point on MPJ's jumper, the fact that he can hit it off movement. That's just stuff that is poison that other teams are forced to pick. Whereas with Minnesota, they can, even if Michael Porter Jr. has a good shooting game, it's okay because Minnesota's personnel is good enough to disrupt Denver's bread and butter, which is that two-man game. And Towns normally is not a great defender, there's no
Yep.
question. But because he has just sort of the strength and mass to absorb Jokic in the post a little bit, and there's enough help, they Minnesota has put themselves in rotation purposefully when Jokic has had the ball and doubled very purposefully, trusting themselves to scramble and recover on
Yep.
time, that, Jokic feels and looks a little bit bothered or a little bit sped up. We're not the first people to make that point, but so few teams have the actual personnel to do that. And so what
I
is
think that's the
norm
most important point, actually.
yeah.
Sorry, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just mean that, like, so what normally might be construed as a weakness in Carl Anthony Towns, if he were to play, a team that has a quicker, high volume, high pick and roll creator that can really target him in space, is now sort of a strength of theirs because they play so much through Jokic. And I think, Naz Reid won six man of the year. He played excellently, in game two, as the whole team did. But just the idea, and he was another guy where the perception on him coming out of LSU was that he was going to be kind of defensively vulnerable, that he had offensive creativity, but he wasn't quite in shape, and no one quite knew what to make of him as far as a long-term ceiling. Was he going to be a starter or some rotation piece or whatever? But it's a testament to all the usual things that it's a testament to
Yep.
how the kinds of players that they have bet on with a lot of length, a lot of ground coverage, and a willingness to really buy in all behind Ant. I like it's wonderful. It is really beautiful basketball to watch if you really are a fan of defensive basketball. And
Yeah.
now I differ from you because though you've been very diplomatic, I do think that series is essentially over. I
Fair.
I just and it has more to do with Murray than it does with Jokic. If he were healthy and they'd won these first two games, then I would be according the defending champions the respect I feel like they deserve. But with him still not being quite right, it's hard to get out of my head how bad he looked and how frustrated he was. And
Yeah.
I don't know that you can really scheme him out of that
Yeah.
unless you're going to start really setting picks in the backcourt to try to free him and speed everything up. But even if you do that, I don't know. It
Yeah.
feels like Denver's getting out of their own skin, and I don't know how well they do when they play out of their own skin.
I wonder if a healthy him would matter. I don't say that as any sort of rude thing to Jamal. Hey, it's a fellow Canadian here. I know what he can do in the playoffs, but at the same time, I just think, to your point, this team is perfectly built to take on and beat the Denver Nuggets. And I don't think it's replicable. Like, if we're trying to find takeaways from the Nuggets perspective, I don't think you can look at this series and say, hey, this is the blueprint, this is the recipe to
Mm.
build and beat the Denver Nuggets. I don't think, name a team, the Sacramento Kings, whatever.
Ugh.
They wouldn't be able to look at this and say we need to get all the size possible, re-sign Alex Len, re-sign whoever. I don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
it just you can't go and replicate this formula. I think you can point at any specific player on the Timberwolves and mention at least two or three things that they've improved on. Nikhil Alexander Walker being one of them, as this guy who can be a catch and shoot threat offensively, has worked to become at least a decent playmaker. Defensively, obviously incredible, especially on the perimeter. He's just been a
Mm-hmm.
hound when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to Murray. You talk about McDaniels and just his own repertoire defensively and how he's sort of improved. He's had some flashes throughout the playoffs, at least, admittedly, not in this series where he's been able to explode offensively too. You mentioned Cat and the defensive stuff. I don't know. You could pinpoint, and obviously the number one is Anthony Edwards, who seems like he's just putting it all together on the biggest stage possible. And I mean, man, he looks tough to stop. I mean, the decision making, it still has some moments where you question his ability to like create for the rest of his teammates, but it hasn't mattered much just because the shot making is incredible and the sheer athleticism and downhill pressure that he provides opens up so many more possibilities for him to make plays for others that it just sort of nullifies any kind of flaw that he has on that end.
Yeah, watching him dust Aaron Gordon,
Yeah.
multiple times without much difficulty, I was like, "Oh my God." Like
Yeah.
if I were like an assistant on the Nuggets bench, I'd be like, "Well, what the hell do we do with this?"
Yeah.
Like
What do you
Aaron's our guy. Like that's
right?
our ace in the hole. We sick on opposing ball handlers that would give, KCP trouble. I like Ant, on the one hand, Ant's shooting is incredible in the playoffs thus far.
Yeah.
And in the first round, by the way, I picked the Wolves to win this series, but I also picked them to lose to the Suns. So I'm not really going to pat myself on the back too much.
Fair.
But they, in that Phoenix matchup, as you know, Phoenix has not at any point this year really distinguished themselves as a very physical, tough defensive team.
No.
And so even though they had success against Minnesota in the regular season, you could understand that Edwards specifically was very comfortable in that playoff setting because when he is dictating the terms of engagement on any individual defender along the perimeter, he's going to feel good about getting to his spots and taking the shots that he wants to take. And what has become very clear very quickly is that KCP, as good a defender as he is, isn't taking Anthony out of his comfort zone. Like it might be that they go to Minnesota and Anthony has a 5 for 19 shooting night, just because sometimes that's what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
But I am most interested in if they play OKC and if he gets matched up with Dort. I don't know what his numbers against OKC have been this year offhand, but then you are finally getting to a perimeter defensive player
The
that is
type, right?
that
Yeah.
is in Edwards's physical neighborhood. Not quite at his spot on the block, but in his
Right.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I want to see if his penchant for sort of contested shots holds up enough in that matchup. Um, to your point on Nikhil, who is another Canadian, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
because he's SGA's cousin. Good, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So they're getting love. They're getting love. But Nikhil, to me, I think his improvement is more or less legitimate. Like I wouldn't expect him to then become a fringe rotation player or something next year. I think he's locked in. Whatever his next contract will be, I'm sure will be in the, you know,
Teens.
12 to 15 or
Yeah.
more $1 million range, and good for him.
Yep.
But what I've been looking at sort of this spring in the NBA and in studying the draft are a type of player that I feel like Nikhil exemplifies, which is what I think most modern shooting guards should be for a contending team. You know, that term shooting guard used to be that like, well, you want some scoring out of your
Right.
two man. You want someone
You're
who can
you're
knock down
Anthony
jumpers.
Edwards, right? You're Anthony Edwards.
Well, I mean, I think everyone would like to look for an Anthony Edwards, but I think now since scoring can come from any position and your best player, your best offensive player can play any position, that it's not you're not looking for Grayson Allen there. Grayson just signed his new deal, whatever, good for him. but that to me is not the type of supporting player at nominal shooting guard that is really valuable, in my opinion. The
Mm.
type that is, and I think we discussed this on our previous episode when we discussed like Derek White,
Right.
Jalen Suggs, Herb Jones, Nikhil, that sort of defensive hound that can still provide positive offensive value. That's what a really valuable supporting player does. I think I've called them switchblade guards on Twitter, X, whatever it's
Would
called.
you classify KCP in that group?
I would. The problem is that you bring a switchblade to an ant fight, and ant
Right.
just
Yeah.
beats it. He just
Yeah.
bites the switchblade in half. But Dort is sort of, again, in terms of pure physical talent, right up there with those guys.
Right.
That's why I think it would be interesting to watch them play. Dallas, should, Luka get right and they make a comeback in that series and win it, their version of that player is probably Josh Green, the closest one that they've got.
Yep.
They've got bigger wings who can switch and defend, but not the real point of attack menace.
Not like the stout 6'4", Case and Wallace. Oh, Case and Wallace is another type, right?
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
They have Josh Green and Exum, but they haven't really played both of those guys at the same time much. They usually either go with one or the other, and I think in the playoffs so far they've leaned Green, but because I just don't know that they would really have the defensive personnel on hand to deal with Ant all the time. But OKC is a different story. That's why I think I'd be very excited to see that series.
Oh yeah.
Um, is there any sort of improvement or any sort of trend that you see on the other half of the bracket, OKC Dallas, that feels relatively permanent to you? Anything you think you've learned about either one of those teams?
I think Chet is just rapidly figuring out how to deal with different matchups as a big man. Round one was against JV, and he's a bit of a bruiser. Like, he's going to get into your chest, more traditional big man, whatever you want to call it, but definitely plays more physical. And then this series, it's Gafford and Lively who are, rim runners, lob threats. He has to sort of split the difference in pick and rolls and be between man and ball a lot more often and sort of see man, see ball. Like, he's incredible at doing those things, but it's a bit of an adjustment from having to guard JV sort of one on one in the post. And I think the most challenging or just the most interesting part of every single step OKC takes is, hey, how is Chet going to embrace this matchup?
Mm-hmm.
They end up facing Minnesota in the next round. It's okay. How is Chet going to work against Rudy, against Cat, against Naz Reid? And how is he going to be able to match up against them? If I remember correctly, in the regular season, when the Thunder and Timberwolves faced off, there was one game where Rudy absolutely dominated Chet.
Mm-hmm.
Next game, Chet completely dominates Rudy, and so he had sort of figured out what he could do, and how to be effective against the guy. I think he has an incredible knack for figuring out matchups rapidly, quickly. Rapidly, quickly. Those are two of the same words. Um, very quickly. Yeah, he has a knack for that. Like, he can process and figure out how he can impact the game very quickly, and that's why you're seeing him, as a rookie do that. So I think that's the improvement I see from Chet. It's kind of going on a game to game basis and seeing what's out there, seeing what he can do to impact the game, and sort of just being that for OKC. Whether it's being the five out floor spacing guy who's sort of camped out in the corner, or is the delay action type of guy, or he's, you know, playing defense, rim protecting, help side defense, all that type of stuff that he does on the defensive end. I think that's where I've seen the most improvement from OKC side. But then, there's Lou Dort too, which I would love to mention, also another Canadian. But we've talked about him already a little.
Yeah, I think that's right about Chet, number one, about his just general aptitude and how quickly he assimilates
Yeah.
into any given matchup. I think that Minnesota is uniquely built to really challenge him. Just because, Towns is sort of the version of Valanciunas that is the nth degree,
Right.
that can really give you problems, but that you not are necessarily going to be able to play off the floor. Now, I'll say that OKC is better positioned to play him off the floor than even Denver is, because Jokic is always going to be there for, and is always going to want to operate inside the arc, even if he sets up outside of it. Whereas the drive and kick offense in OKC is going to really try to challenge Towns to cover space and cover space and recover, all the time. I'm sure they'd be strategic about who they are helping off of and who Towns is nominally on. I'm sure if Giddy continues to start, then they'll either park Rudy or Towns there and
Yep.
go off of that. But nonetheless, it would at least it would be more, I think, of a stress test on Towns than this matchup is. But that's sort of how I think of, like, it might be that there's just stuff that I'm missing about the Thunder offense when I watch it, but like in this game one against Dallas, Cason Wallace, I think, hits two threes. Isaiah Joe hits three. Aaron Wiggins hits two. Those are guys who are all off the bench.
Yep.
And they're, they were, I think, either the best or second best 3-point shooting team in the league. Them and Boston were 1 and 2 all year, shot a very, very high percentage. Um, and they are so committed to always playing five out.
Yep.
Always, 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 always have to have a five who can shoot. So I sort of think that their playoff fate is just very much tied to how their supporting players shoot their threes. Because
Mhm.
that's what I mean, with few exceptions, that's what a lot of them are there to do.
Yep.
And they're not going to get away from that identity. As good as Shea is and as good as Jalen is, they're going to get their points, but a lot of these shots are going to be coming from, those players I mentioned, those supporting pieces. And when I think about them against Minnesota, I just think that Minnesota's length are going to make those look so uncomfortable for so many of them that I it might be prisoner of the moment, but I tend to think that Minnesota is a uniquely bad matchup for them. I just kind of get that impression. But by the same token, if you can frustrate Ant, then Minnesota's offense could start to fall apart. If Towns' foul issues crop up, that could be a big problem.
Yep.
Um, so I don't know. I don't know. I guess I could probably revisit that if and when that series happens, but that's what's got my wheels turning, because I think that both of them have a real edge in their series. Now, Minnesota's up 2-0, OKC's up 1-0, but Luka's knee is banged up. I mean, is there anything else on that series that you really think could swing it, or do you feel like OKC has the edge?
I mean, to your point about 3-point shooting, the Thunder really loaded up on Luca in game one and forced him to be that playmaker. And like obviously he's gonna make the passes, but the rest of the team wasn't hitting the shots. Like Tim Hardaway Jr. just came back from injury and wasn't, hitting his normal shots. Josh Green hit a few threes, but like you're okay with that shot for the most part. I think if that's the outcome of an offensive possession, you're happy with that. Kyrie made them, kind of get scorned on a couple of possessions, but that wasn't again like I think if you're getting the ball out of Luca's hands and he isn't the one putting the pressure on the defense, scoring the ball, being relentless in that way, I think it opens up a lot of issues for Dallas's offense, and it makes it far too reliant on guys who, like, you just don't trust as much. This was my thing going into the OKC Dallas series. Is I trust OKC's depth 15% more than I do
Mm.
Dallas's depth. And it's just like some guys can hit shots. Like Case and Walls can come in and hit two corner threes for you, and Isaiah Joe can come in and be this firecracker. And like Aaron Wiggins has been stellar in the postseason, like you mentioned. And I trust those guys just a little bit more than I do Dante Exum, Josh Green, even to a lesser extent, although he's been great, Derek Jones Jr., to facilitate and create offense when they're loading up so heavily on Luca.
Yeah, I think that is a certainly a difference between the two teams. I think that, in general, that tends to swing whether or not you're playing at home, the
Yeah.
comfort of your
Yep.
supporting players, especially if they're younger. So we'll see when the series moves to Dallas if that switches at all. But in like Luka is not going to allow a defense to take his shots away. Like by hook or by crook, Luka's going to get up like his 25
Yeah.
shot. Like I don't know how many shots he averaged in the regular season, but like he's not going to get cheated in that respect. And if he's shooting 10 of 25 instead of shooting 13 of 25, like that, it's just a major difference over the course
Yeah.
of a game.
The shooting
So,
too, like the 3-point shooting is not turned like he had an incredible shooting season in the regular season. And then I don't know exactly what the numbers are, but he has not been shooting the ball well from
mhm.
three. And that's a factor too. It's like, hey, he was able to stretch the floor incredibly in the postseason and sorry, in the regular season. And now he just hasn't been able to do that. Let me pull up some stats here. So he was 1 of 8 in game one, 1 of 10 in their last game against the Clippers, 2 of 8 from three, 1 of 9, 3 of 14, 5 of 14, 4 of 12. So it's just a lot of misses from three, where that like he was a great high volume shooter for all 82 this year, you know?
Yeah, I mean he's
Yeah.
banged up, man.
Yeah, he is. He is.
It's a
Yeah.
shame. And again, playing against Dort
Right.
for it can wear anyone down.
Yeah, big time.
Um in the sort of perhaps future retired Jersey Raptors series of Knicks and Pacers with between Pascal and OG. Hope OG's hamstring is okay. We still don't have word exactly on how bad that is.
Yeah.
Knicks are up 2-0 in that series. Is there anything you feel like you've learned about players on either team in that one?
Oh man, it's funny. It's hard to take away stuff from Indiana because this series feels so different than the Milwaukee series. Like
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah Jackson was just not contributing at this level in the Buck series as he is now. I mean, he's crashing the offensive glass. He's run it, roll into the paint. He's finishing in the paint. He's been this energetic big off of the bench, and I didn't see any of that against the Bucks, and so I don't know how much to take away from that. It's like, okay, is this what we're seeing? Is this the actualized version of Isaiah Jackson? I mean, in terms of improvement from the Pacers side, I think it would have to be Andrew Nembhard, another Canadian, by the way. We're really leaning into the Canadian angle here, but um, he has been able to get downhill pretty frequently in the postseason. I think his kind of change of pace in the mid range area has been impressive. The pull up shooting and creation has been better. It was almost non existent at some point in his career. It is now better. And I think that's the most interesting part. It's like he's sort of figuring out the offensive side of the game for himself, and that's something that'll be important for Indiana's future and for his own future too, moving forward in the league.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I had not watched a ton of that Pacers Bucks series because again, I thought it was kind of over before it started.
Rightfully
Though
so, honestly. Yeah,
I did watch that game three though, that thriller, which
yeah,
was a lot of fun. But uh, it's interesting because their mission in this series really is to try to find anyone who can check Brunson at all. And
yeah,
Nemhard has struggled with that assignment. I mean,
big time. Yeah,
the narrative in the second half of the game today was, you know, why and when Carlisle removed TJ McConnell from the game. And I think probably
yeah,
a lot of it had to do with his faith in Nemhard, but McConnell was just the best sort of rotation guard that performed in that game tonight and sat most of the entire fourth quarter, if not the entire fourth quarter. So,
yeah, yeah,
I it's tough. That's another one where even though the Knicks are the walking wounded, their two biggest strengths, which are really Brunson and their ability to rebound, particularly offensively, just happen to coincide with real Pacers vulnerabilities, which is that perimeter defense and cleaning the glass.
yeah.
So
.com.
I mean, I still think that series could be very long. I picked the Knicks to win that in seven, especially if Anunoby's really going to be out. I mean, that obviously dictates a whole lot.
Even if
But
Brunson is, I mean, Brunson had to come back in the second half, and in the post
yeah,
game interview, he was like, "I don't know if I'm going to be ready." Whatever, but yeah,
but it's just it's hard, and the Pacers are really kind of going through it. This is the first version of this team that's been in the playoffs. Nemhard first playoff exposure, Halliburton, Neesmith, unless he ever rode the bench in Boston during a playoff run or
right.
something. But like essentially, Siakam would be sort of the playoff vet. Maybe Miles Turner, some remnant from the Sabonis days, got a cup of coffee when he was really young, but like
Yeah.
this is their first time, and that team coalesced in the middle of the season, and it's a lot to ask for them to go in a second round series and win it from a team that operates as cohesively as the Knicks do.
This
But
feels like, to your point about that. I've sort of made this comp before, but when the Kings first traded for Sabonis, that second half of the season between Fox and Sabonis was kind of shaky. Like it wasn't the greatest. It
mhm.
didn't look the best. They still were trying to figure out an identity, and then they hired Mike Brown, and so he sort of cultivated what that would look like. And obviously, we know how the rest of that went. But I feel like that sort of applies to this Pacers team too. And to your point, that coalescing in the second half of the season just feels like they're battling between two different identities, which is the Pascal type of team, which is, hey, he's going to cook in the post up scenarios. He's going to cook in the high block, isolation. Guys will crash in on him. He'll make plays. And then there's the Tyrese Halliburton, which is, hey, I want to push. Let's move the ball. Let's like, and those two styles feel like they're clashing a bit. I think you just need an off season and a training camp to iron that out. And they haven't had that really. So that feels like what it is for Indiana, just a clash of styles that doesn't give them these consistent ways to win basketball games.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. Between New York, I mean, and this is sort of my draft brain coming out, between New York, Oklahoma City, and Minnesota, those three teams especially, uh, there are just so many different role player archetypes that I feel like are thriving in the playoffs. We talked about, Nikhil already,
Yeah.
but you know, Jaden McDaniels, as you mentioned, has played really well, but on offense has been, more hit and miss. But as a low usage player having such an enormous impact, he and Anunoby as these sort of long armed, strong menaces who can really guard up and down the positional spectrum.
Yeah.
It's just a reinforcement of how important that kind of player is. Um, Hart, there really aren't many players like Josh Hart in the entire league, but someone who can rebound that well as a guard, as a supporting player, and push in transition and
Incredible.
cover ground and communicate on defense and like someone who plays at that fervor again is going to be valuable to any kind of a team.
Yeah.
I think that I don't think that Podchemsky is of the same physical talent as Hart is, but his sort of appeal is similar in how he attacks the glass and how intelligent of an offensive player that he is. But there are little draft comparisons I can make to each one of these guys. Miles McBride, Deuce McBride, another one who's sort of that switchblade type, but he's more of a point guard defender
Right.
specifically, rather, but that's a reason why he has come in and been able to, again, after minutes being pretty sporadic throughout the season, even after the trade of Quickly, why he's been able to find relatively quick success is that he, has pretty good confidence in his pull-up jumper. He can hit his threes. He's not afraid to shoot them, deep in fourth quarters. That's what all those minutes that Thibodeau's throwing at everyone have tended to spur is all this confidence. But being able to defend your position and defend up, it is just going to really, really help you. And DiVincenzo, did you know that DiVincenzo
Man,
he
incredible.
he is he has made this season Steph made the most threes in the league. The next most threes in the league were made by Luka Doncic.
Right.
And then 1 3 behind Luka was DiVincenzo in the entire NBA. And this,
Uh,
he didn't even qualify for most improved player because they're whatever ridiculous.
yeah, yeah,
Did you play 20 minutes in enough games? Nonsense. I mean, that most high volume shooters, like high volume supporting shooters who are just getting them up, like have no defensive utility at all. And DiVincenzo isn't like a lockdown defender. If you screen him, he will switch off more often than not. That's what was happening tonight in this game. But he plays passing lanes exceptionally well. He himself can rebound very well,
yeah.
and he does enough to stay on the floor. Like it's again, like what a renaissance for him, and just
Crazy.
another sort of just another little mini archetype. If you can really get those threes up and really knock them down, and you can at least map the floor, then you're going to be able to make a lot of money
Yeah.
and have a real role. But sorry, I'm sort of running off at the
No,
mouth
you're good.
now.
It feels like the common thread with this Knicks team and all the role players is that they are all incredible two-way players, and they sort of understand their roles. Not sort of. They understand their roles extremely well. They know the game plan. They execute it to perfection. And on top of that, I just think they've found their niche. They've found what makes sense for them. It's incredible. It's a testament to how they've built their team, but I think, like you said with OKC and Minnesota, there's guys on all of those teams that have that similar trait. And to your point about improvement or maybe just roster construction and team building, those type of guys, do you well, actually this is a good question for you from a draft perspective. Are
Mm-hmm.
those type of guys becoming more common or less common to find?
The two-way guys that you're talking about.
Yeah, these. I mean, like, I don't want to call all of them these switch Swiss Army knives, but you know what I mean. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're always hard to find. Like the way I think about it is the NBA is obviously where the very best basketball athletes in the world play.
yeah,
You start from that general precept. And then you say, well, with the infusion of talent into the game and the way that money is dispersed in the NBA, which is much more favorable than it is in the NFL, for example, the athletic bar is just rising. It's been rising steadily over the last however many years. And so, what was a supporting player in 2012 is no longer qualifies as a supporting player in 2024. So, you, I look at guys like Hart or Dort, and while it's hard to find exact replicas of that player, finding sort of power based athletes
hmm
that are as opposed to just sort of your traditional sort of more slender basketball athlete, which there's still a place for. I mean, Nikhil's a slender guy,
yeah,
whatever. Kevin Durant's still really good. But finding those power based supporting players who can win physical battles on the glass or at point of attack or on drives, displacing when they're attacking a closeout. Those are the kind of guys that I feel like will become increasingly in vogue. And they're not just available everywhere, but there's a couple in this draft class that I think are really there. I think the kid from Providence, Devin Carter, I don't know if you're familiar with him,
yeah. I am, of course.
but
He's my guy.
he's one that I feel like is right up that alley, is very much in that mold. He's not quite as big as Josh Hart is, or I shouldn't say, because he's a big boy. He's not as tall as Josh Hart is. He's like
Right,
6'3",
right.
but attacks the glass with the same tenacity, sticks out as an athlete in every single game he plays, is like, in my opinion, more athletic than Steph Castle, like period. And people think Steph Castle should go into like the top seven.
Right.
So like really finding even in a sea of excellent athletes that are constantly trying to find their place, finding the ones that like really have that pop and that explosion and that burst. That's what I think sort of will define the playoffs this year and moving forward. I think the more one dimensional you appear athletically, you know, your role is going to start to shrivel. And that's why again, don't mean to keep picking on Grayson Allen, but I didn't get that contract extension. I know in a vacuum why the number made sense because of the rising cap and they're over the second apron. So they got to spend the money
Right.
somewhere. And he's here and he had a good year. Like that's all well and good. It could have been, I guess, rational from that
Yep.
perspective. But in terms of value that I expect in a league where everyone's getting more athletic and defensive versatility is really the currency of a supporting player, I just think it's going to be hard unless he can really up his ability to play passing lanes and be sort of a zoned up defender on the weak side.
Hmm.
And, you know, usually length and explosion help with that stuff too.
Yeah.
So that's more in terms of how easy they are to find. They're hard to find, but they do come along in each class. You just got to know what you're looking for, I guess.
Scout him properly.
Yeah, man. I know that you said that you needed to go, and it's late
Oh,
since we waited for that Knicks Pacers game to wrap. If there's anything else we didn't hit, if you want to talk about Derek White and how awesome he is, or if you wanted to maybe visit on some more unfortunate circumstances in Cleveland or in New Orleans or in Philadelphia or
mm,
Miami, please do
mm,
so. I want to give you your time. I just wanted to
yeah, yeah.
allow you to bow out if you needed to.
How I guess we can finish off on Cleveland because I'm interested to see where you're at with this because Evan Mobley,
Mm-hmm.
from the draft perspective, extremely talented player, came out of the as a rookie as a really really talented player, incredible defensive player. Everybody has been hoping for the offensive side of things to catch up. And while
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily hope that he'll be a 3-point threat, maybe that's in his cards, maybe that isn't. I don't think that's necessarily the make or break for him offensively. But the physicality and when he catches the ball with 2 feet in the paint and sort of looks and feels lost or looks and feels outmatched physically, that's the thing that concerns me moving
Mm-hmm.
forward developmentally. And I wonder, from your perspective, if that's something that pops out to you. Should I be concerned about that? Should I not? Do you think that's something he'll eventually iron out? But yeah,
I
that
think
was the
I
one thing that I popped out. Yeah.
yes, you're an excellent analyst. If you feel concerned about it, then there's cause for
It's just
concern.
for
I
I don't know. Well, like I want because I'm a big Evan Mobley fan, and I
yeah, I am
and I
too.
I want you to ease my my worry. I guess
Okay,
I
yeah.
don't know.
So Evan was my number one guy in that class, which I have stood by and doubled down on for anyone who cares to, track my opinions. I still think that if I had to take one player from that class, there's a lot of arguments. Like that draft year, particularly,
Yeah,
there's a lot of arguments for a lot of guys, including Mr. Barnes.
yeah,
But I I have consistently gone with Evan because his context in Cleveland, frankly, has not been very good because he's had to play with another big as much as I love Jared Allen.
yeah,
And Donovan Mitchell, for as good as he is, has not been, he's never had the reputation of sort of mapping the floor a pass ahead. He is a score first guy because he can afford to be because he's that brilliant of a scorer. And that's frequently what his team needs. But like, the easy money for Evan has not always been there, and the organic reps on the ball have not always been there. But even in spite of that, he's gotten better every season. And like his first big jump, and he was good as a rookie, but his
yeah,
first big jump as a player was on the defensive end last year in year two, in the second half of the season when he really made his sort of DPOY push. He made a leap as a defender in terms of positioning and being able to contest. And in the playoffs, defensively, he's been excellent. And
yeah,
it's like not quite talked about that much that like Jared Allen just got hurt in the middle of the series and he had to play five immediately. And even if a lot of people think that's where he should play the majority of his minutes, it's still hard to do that mid series to just switch your role in your game plan and still produce, particularly on defense. And he
right,
has. Offensively, going back to what I was saying about power athletes, Evan is a springy athlete, off the ground really quickly, very good second jump, but he's whatever he is, 220, 225 pounds. And so, if that, maybe, I mean, maybe he's only 215 or whatever, but like, he, that means that he is not going to physically overpower anyone down low or facing him up. He's going to have to blow by them and finish with his length and, finish with his pop off the ground if he can.
Right.
But there isn't a lot of just, again, easy physical battles won if he tries to bang into anybody. So I think that the 3 point part of it, in terms of make or break, I think it is sort of make or break if he's going to become a 20 point per game guy. His threes did go up this year, and I think he shot like 37% on them or something like that, like something very encouraging. But as soon as that Jared Allen injury happened and he became the nominal five, he stopped shooting threes.
Yeah.
He hasn't attempted a three since game 4 of that Orlando series. Just
Yeah.
hasn't happened because he's played center. And I don't think that, unfortunately, I don't think the Cavs are a creative enough offensive team on the fly to now bring him out as a center and have him really space and start shooting threes. So I think next year is, maybe that roster will look a little bit different and you'll see the 3 point volume more consistent. But I think in terms of like playing sort of a Jared Allen role, like Jared had really mastered um his sort of touch floaters in the lane and
The push shot.
vacating the
Yeah.
lane at the right spot, making sure those alleyways for Mitchell were always open and he was, you know, repositioning himself to accommodate Mitchell. Like that's a lot of stuff that just takes a lot of time and reps to get right.
Yeah.
And so it may not like it. I just think that Mobley doesn't quite know what his shot diet is that he wants and that he likes yet. And will like where it goes, I frankly don't know. If it were me, I would encourage him to set up beyond the arc and just attack off the dribble from out there if he feels comfortable. Cause like that's his physical edge. It's how
Right.
quickly he covers ground, how quickly he can get off the floor. And so you want him in space. You don't want him on the block or you don't want him in close quarters where he's trying to put his shoulder into, Mo Wagner and gain an advantage. It's like a waste of his athleticism.
Right.
And so I just don't think that right now in the playoffs against the Celtics on the fly is where we're going to see that come to fruition. It's just going to have to be when he's the lone big on the team. And
Hmm. Not
I don't
yet.
know. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard decisions. I don't think the ship has sailed on him scoring 20 plus a game or something like that, but I think it will be, you won't see it until next year. That's
Right.
going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
he did
thank you.
average whatever, like 16 tonight or this
Yeah. Yeah.
season, which is
Yeah.
still not
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
No, he's still getting to it, like to solid production for where he is on the sort of pecking order for the Cavs. I'm glad you were able to alleviate some of my concerns. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Of course, S. Of course. Um, anything else you want to say? Any other overriding lesson you feel like you've learned so far from the playoffs?
Um, I think it sort of applies to every postseason, but depth and versatility reign supreme. That's what it feels like. That's what it always feels like. And as this war of attrition sort of hits the Knicks and the Mavericks and pretty much every team in the postseason right now, it shows. Like Denver could have used a couple of extra players in their
Mm-hmm.
rotation, and that's very clear against this Timberwolves team. I think to a certain extent that same thing applies to the Knicks, but they're still kind of trekking along here. Depth and versatility reign supreme. Actually, you know what? I think that's a credit to the Knicks, just because sort of a next man up mentality that they have. They've been able to get production from a Precious and from Boyan for a little bit before he got hurt himself and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, depth and versatility reign supreme. That's the main thing I would say.
You think would you say Boston are the favorites
Yeah, yeah.
to win the
I
whole
mean,
thing right now?
especially with the way Denver is looking, it just feels like Boston versus Minnesota or OKC, whatever that will look like. And I'm good for either series. That would be incredible hoops. I
Mhm.
think it would I don't know if it would go the distance like game 7, but I could see those being highly competitive series. But yeah.
Yeah, to me, the series I'd want to see most would probably be Boston and Minnesota. I
Yeah.
like as good as I think the Thunder are, and they've defied expectations the whole year with how ready they have been.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, I think they rely on supporting 3-point shooting and having that translate all the way to the finals being this young for all those guys
It's a lot. Yeah.
would be a lot.
Yeah.
And the Celtics rely a lot on supporting 3-point shooting as well. You know, their 3-point volume leads the league, and their 3-point percentage, like I said, is either 1 or 2 with OKC. So
Mhm.
they get them up, and I would like to see Minnesota's length snuff that out or
Yeah.
try to snuff that out. That's I like to me that would be great drama.
Yeah.
So that would be a great series for me. I don't know that I would take the Celtics sight unseen. I'd like to see the shape both teams are in when they get to the finals. But if it's them
Yeah.
and Mini, I think that's fireworks.
Oh yeah,
Love
yeah,
to
yeah,
see
big
that.
time. I mean, every regular season game they played this season was incredible. I mean, they're probably some of the best games of the year between Boston and Mini.
Yeah, yeah, be tremendous. Okay, man. What should the people look forward to from you?
I will be posting more video essays on my Twitter, so be on the lookout for that. Some writing at Forbes and the Sporting News, and that is it for now. That is it for now. Yes, there's other stuff in the works, but that is it for now. That is it for
Okay,
now.
at
Yes.
just S Baraheni. S, thanks
Yes.
so much, man. Thank you for telling the truth here on the
Yeah.
Chucking Darts podcast. That's what we're
Voir
here
dire,
for.
baby. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Thank y'all for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. I'm happy to be back. Thank you, S, for the late night.
Thank you.
Uh, y'all have fun. Enjoy the playoffs. Get some sleep this time of year, please. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.